Hello, everyone, and welcome to the XExamine podcast. We have some good topics we'll be analyzing and talking about today, and we're so excited to have you as part of our discussion. I'd like to start off with a humorous and perhaps disturbing small story and analogy. So imagine some lionesses on the Serengeti. They're very strong, but they still have to be strategic. The lion can't just chase down anything and fight with unlimited energy. So they lie in wait, they use strategy, and then when they're taking down these buffalo, do they take down the strongest one, the biggest alpha male there? Do they seek him out and then go take him down? Or do they maybe see some stragglers, see some ones that are healthy, they're not diseased, but they're not the fastest. Maybe they aren't as close to the rest of the herd. They're vulnerable and they're easy to pick off, and they won't have much defense once they're surrounded by the lionesses. So now just replace those lionesses with an incoming horde of 87,000 new IRS agents, and then replace the animals in the center, the prey, if you will, as us, the taxpayers.
I absolutely love the people on the other side right now thinking that the addition of all of these IRS agents will just by default indicate that, oh man, they're really going to come after the rich now.
They're gonna eat the rich, eat the rich.
Oh man, it's and here I am just thinking to myself, I'm just like, oh man, this is going to be bad. We're going to see so many more audits. Like, will they go after the rich? I mean, we can kind of like take apart what that would really look like. The assumption there being that somehow the IRS and Department of Justice right now are are insufficiently staffed in order to take on, I don't know, a bunch of rich people who are probably doing their, like, they're not doing their own taxes anyway, right? Like they probably have a bunch of, they have literally like teams of lawyers and accountants who are probably working within the law to give them the best tax breaks possible. So
Yes,
this really
those people.
strange relationship between like trying to say that we have to go after the rich people. So it's like, why wouldn't you just change the tax code then?
Yeah, it's because it's all part of a game. It's just a lot of smoke and mirrors, dog and pony show. Lead you around, put the horse blinders on you, make show you what we want you to see. Look, we're doing this, we're doing that. It's like, why don't you just close the loopholes that allow people to legally avoid the taxes, which is different from evading the taxes. Evading would be like that's how Al Capone got caught, but avoiding is legal. So, and if you ask somebody, hey, do you want to pay an extra $10,000 this year in taxes or do you not want to pay? You can legally avoid that. And would you choose to not pay that $10,000? Of course you would. So, well, maybe I should make that assumption in today's day and age. But you're absolutely right that, and also the people who are working for the ultra mega rich that we're trying to eat, those people are very well paid and very well educated, and they've been in the industry for a long time. So I don't think that the odds are in the favor of newbies or rookies who are coming onto the IRS that they're going to have the same level of prowess to combat other accountants who work in the tax field. Like I guess I just don't know who they're going to catch. I mean, the people who they're going to catch. I mean, are they going after Donna, who works at Denny's and who's not reporting her tips because she's making like 3.47 an hour and she's making a little bit extra in tips to try to make ends meet, and because of that, she's not going to report her cash tips. I mean, if they're on a card, sure, you got to report them, but it's yet to be determined whether everybody who receives cash tips is reporting them, or they're going after the. I think it was Jim Jordan who was talking about the high school coaches, which I knew a few of them personally when they would overtalk, or I would hear them speak about that during the academic classes. Maybe they would be a coach for basketball, or they would coach the track team, or they'd be an assistant coach for the football team, and they might make an extra $3,000 or $2,500 a year in addition for that. And they would say, like, for the number of hours that they put in, it's a very, very meager wage. But because they're already at the school, they like students, they're there, and they just either come in earlier or stay later, and then maybe go in on a Saturday or Sunday if there's a game or something, or Friday night, to make a few extra dollars in addition to furthering their their relationship with the students, and to help children grow and become adults. So these are the people who we're going after, the middle class.
That's what it sounds like most likely. Um, or alternatively, my idea is that they possibly are going after all of the fraud that was enacted with the stimulus funding, which I think
Uh,
is also very likely because we're still within that like IRS sort of tax period in which, I because what is it? It's like you only have to hold on to your tax returns for a certain number of years. I'm not saying that people should actively get rid of them, but you have a certain like risk period more or less where, yeah, you should hold on to this in case you're audited, yada yada yada. But I actually think it's like that small business loan and like PPP loan fraud that we've seen so prevalent during the COVID times that may be the case to warrant all of these extra IRS agents. The problem, though, comes like, are you going to just fire all those agents once that job is complete
hmm,
or not? It seems like they're just growing the size of the force. It would be different if they were just hiring a bunch of agents for a very specific special project.
like a
But the
task
fact,
force.
yeah, but the fact that they're keeping so many more on, is makes one wonder, like, are they going to try to implement universal basic income, which means that they would just have to have more auditors on staff. And so they're preparing for that without signaling to the economy that that might be coming. Who's really to say? I would say that the IRS agents, though, the increase in the amount of them doesn't necessarily correlate with specifically going after people of a certain threshold in the economy that one would perceive as being wealthy. It doesn't add up. It seems like just having more of them is necessary because of how many more people that they have to audit.
Yeah, I agree. You just need people who are going to crunch numbers and analyze tons of forms that are sent in, because there are a lot of rich people, but there aren't that many rich people. Because with that accumulation of wealth, it's the exact reason that people complain about the so-called 1% or the 3% or the 5%, because they're 1%. There's not that many of them. So if you really want to
Yeah.
go after them, do you really need uh, 87,000 people, which I have heard is doubling the size of the IRS? Or perhaps they are implementing or trying to figure out the plans and the framework for a CBDC, a central bank digital currency, where they would have total transparency and accountability and control over a digital form of money, to whom, from whom, and when. So everything can be uh, ran through the transparent tubes of the government, where they are the ultimate gatekeeper. I do believe that the goal is to eliminate cash, and they've done a pretty good job of getting rid of the coins. Now, granted, coins, there's uh, not a lot of. It's just basically bookkeeping at this point with pennies. People don't seem to mind. There are some people that like those pennies, but if people drop pennies on the ground because they simply don't want the change, that's pretty done. So then they came up with some sort of farcical story to tell us there's a national coin shortage because of COVID. And as you know, when you stop using coins, they just disappear from existence, much like when people stop driving during the pandemic, their cars simply disappear out of their garages.
I think
You
you
can
bring
tell
up
I'm
some
a bit
really
I'm skeptical about the national coin shortage. So I imagine that cash is also the same way. And why wouldn't they want more control? There are already some other countries that, um, I think maybe New Zealand and some other. There are some other weird examples where people who keep their money in bank accounts, either got a 10% haircut and they just had some funds taken out to cover the government's buffoonery in order to keep the system stabilized, which is like a huge, um, infrequent, one time style tax. Hey, we're going to take 10% of everybody's account right now, obviously excluding the rich people because those are the people who control the country. So they're going to say, I'd like to keep my money. But even if they did have to take that much, it wouldn't really hurt them. And they can also control, then at that point, it would be possible to say, well, this person has a low social score, so they're blacklisted, so you actually can't send them money. And also, that account is frozen. So if you want to see government control, we can also look at China, where there is already the central bank digital currency of the digital yuan that's in play right now, and people do have social scores. And if you want to have a dissenting opinion against the government, and you're not allowed to buy food, you're not allowed to buy medicine, you're not allowed to pay your rent, so you might be evicted from your home. And when you look into your children's faces when they're hungry, and your wife who is hungry or needs medication, that will make you bend the knee very quickly. So CBDC is a form of tyrannical money, and we should do everything in our power to resist every single millimeter of its advancement. But that could be one of the very beginning pieces of foundational framework, which is being produced by the introduction of 87,000 new IRS agents, which would perhaps double the size of that agency.
Yes, I would agree because there's no shortage of stories involving intimidation tactics by IRS agents and normal working class Americans. And I think you've laid out a perfectly reasonable case as to why having some sort of centralized banking authority will undermine, our inherent freedoms in this country. I think a centralized banking authority is counter to the way Americans um, should run their country according to the Constitution. I really think it's against the spirit of what the founding fathers were trying to do. And I don't think it's a good direction for us to head to because we will just end up like any other empire state, socialist framework. Like socialism isn't necessarily new in the way that just because Marx wrote about it in the mid, 19th century that all of a sudden that's when it came into being. No, like monarchies and feudalism, aristocracy before that, very, very similar approaches, right? We're talking about like more or less centralized authoritative structures that are doing and imposing all sorts of ridiculousness onto the society that they're governing. Whereas America, the big revolution was, I think, working towards more a decentralized state, more of a anarchic state, and that's the direction that we should be heading towards, not only in reality but also like conceptually we should be thinking more along those lines of, okay, well, how do I improve upon the system to make it more resilient in a decentralized way?
It's probably not by passing the Inflation Reduction Act, so a centralized authority can spend $400 billion but cost the taxpayers $700 billion. And
We really need to question the integrity of these sorts of acts that are passing. Like, people really need to look at how out of control our budgets have been in the government in the past 20 years. Like, quantitative easing, I think it's actually become so our, gold brain sort of memory society in our society today is like we have quantitative easing that was more or less introduced into our tool set, the Federal Reserve tool set in like mid 2000s, mostly used during the recession of 2008. And we've just got used to this whole idea of like, you know what? If anything happens, we'll just print more money. Who cares about what inflation is? We'll just lie to the public. I mean, hell, we've been lied to. I know that we're relatively young, but ever since they started lying about WMDs in Iraq, I feel like the narrative has just been more eroded over time in the amount of how much I can trust these people to the point where I actually believe they are actively lying to me every time they open their mouths.
we're like, okay, so we have intel that 9/11 was planned in Saudi Arabia. Let's say that Iraq has WMDs and also invade Afghanistan. Sound like a plan, boys? All right. Drop your cocks and grab your socks.
Oh yeah, it's we have almost too much history to go off of to make any sort of salient cases. Like, okay, people are trying to say, why would you say that you can't trust your government? And I would just simply reverse the question. Like, I think the burden of proof is that you're taking the case that government should be trusted when I have so much evidence to the contrary.
Yeah, government is run by people. And just imagine you're a boss, which chances are you're sitting in an audience, and if you work for your boss, they do things that you disagree with and you think that you could do them better. And yet they are in charge. So just multiply that, throw a multiplier in there of like 4,000x, and then also start paying them a pool of money that is sort of decentralized from innumerable numbers. Essentially, you're just a number as a taxpayer, your TIN or your SSN, and then you just pay into this huge pool. And even that pool is not enough because they're going to throw a multiplier on that, spend way more than that. And then when they decrease the amount of debt that they are accruing, they're still accruing debt, but they're accruing even less. They'll say, hey, look, we got a surplus because we just play these games with semantics. And it's like, oh, so we meet the definition of being in a recession of like the definition of Merriam-Webster and what economists use. Well, it's more just like a vibe. If you read the New York Times, there was a now granted it was an opinion article, but the entire newspaper is an opinion. So they had a writer say, well, yeah, I mean, okay, sure. Gas prices are sky high, food is really expensive. There's some logistics issues with empty shelves. Just name any of your top 5 problems that you've seen or heard about or encountered with yourself. Chip shortages, whatever. It's all just a vibe. So, sure. I mean, it meets criteria. It's like if I go get tested for HIV, I mean, it's really just a vibe. I mean, lab results, it's we can just really disregard facts at this point and then just whatever I want to believe. I just go outside, I look at the clouds, and whatever shape I think that resembles most, that can be my reality.
Yeah, I mean, even outside of the ridiculousness of these articles that are trying to just blow smoke and mirrors all over the place, uh, there are basic like economic mechanics that we can discuss as to why increasing the amount of agents is, just inherently inefficient on what you could be doing for your economy in a time when you need efficiency because you have shortages and you have prices going out of control. So the
Yeah,
best thing
like
you could
maybe
do is overproduce things in order to drive down prices and also supply people with stuff.
well said. Yeah, a lot of things are as simple as that. Supply and demand. That's why people control the diamond supply. So when the supply is low, then the price remains high. That's why even during the Great Depression, the US government was paying farmers to not grow crops on their farmland, and in some instances to burn them, because we want prices to remain high. So the corruption goes back, and whether it's corruption or just really bad choices caused by stupid people in positions of power who have authority over how your life is lived out, it's been going on for a while, and that's why this entire time period that we live in, it is really nice. In the sense that it's an awakening. I mean, we're waking up and we are realizing that it is a nightmare, but recognition is the first step of solving the problem. If you don't know there's a problem, then you're probably not going to be able to solve it. So
Yeah,
87,000,
absolutely.
why not 7,000? Why is there an extra 80,000? Why is the number increased at all? And when you hire new people, those people, by if you control for all other variables, simply hiring one more person means your taxes have to go up because you have to pay that person's salary. That person's not going to work for free. And then they also have benefits. They have a pension. If they're going to stay around long term, they're going to have that retirement. So there's not only just their salary, but it's a whole package. So doubling the size or 87,000 new agents. I mean, it's really it's you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube.
Yeah, I mean that's a very excellent point. You're talking about all else equal, we have a limited labor supply, and you're taking people out of the productive workforce. You're incentivizing them and giving them this comfy job at the behest of exploiting the rest of your population in order to do exactly that again is exploit them even further because the IRS agents, they're not like they're farmers out there, growing new crops and tending to animals and increasing our food supply as such. No, they're going after people who are already working in productive fields and they're making them less productive.
Decrease the oxygen supply, increase the suffocation,
So the whole
apply
thing,
more force on
however,
the pillow.
yeah, no matter how you spin it, there's a basic reality to how these things work that, like, okay, so what are the common criticisms to our points involving this? It's something to the fact of like, oh, the IRS, they somehow magically bring in 10 more dollars to each dollar that you spend on their workforce. It's like, okay, well, you're still taking that from the economy because the economy is still like a fixed system, more or less. Yeah, like there is some international trade, absolutely. But like more or less, you're still talking about an exploitive practice on your resources in the economy, land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. You're extracting resources from those elements and you're just spreading them around. But you're also taking a tax from that. It's not like you're just taking it and giving it to someone else. You're also like shaving off some in the process because those people have to, exactly how you said, they have to be paid on a regular salary, they have to have pension, they have to have health insurance, all this kind of stuff.
There's a chain of parasitic. Instead of val added, it's like val subtracted. It's value subtracted because every step along the way, there's that parasitic loss. And by the time it comes full circle and is somehow distributed to another party or group or cause, some sort of so called benefit, it's lost so much energy along the way. It's just like energy traveling through a power line. The reason that they have to convert it between these different forms is because the energy is degraded over time. It can only travel so far. It's the same thing with computer cables. When you have like this new Thunderbolt 3 or Thunderbolt 4, the cable can only be so long because of the transmission that's involved, and the power can only go so far. Even a USB cable can only go so long before the power can't transfer the data, and you have to increase the power supply or find a new method of doing this. So the the total cost is huge. And as you're saying, if you wanted to really increase productivity, you could also just simply have those people produce a good or a service instead of an administrative oversight or double checking supervision. I'm not sure that these people who are keeping an extra $10 in taxes somehow, whether legitimately or illegitimately, like if they messed up on their taxes or if they're purposefully not paying these extra $10 they should pay. I mean, is that $10? Is that clandestine money? Is that going to like the detriment and the decay of society, or is it just $10? Maybe it ends up in their bank account just accruing a little bit of interest, or maybe it ends up being handed off to their daughter who's going to a movie, or like they bought seeds to plant in their garden. Like the money's gonna money finds a home. Money finds a way to find a home. And the most easy way to simplify this entire process is to just make a sales tax. Get rid of everything, and if you buy stuff, you pay tax. If you don't buy stuff, if it's not spent, it's not taxed. And maybe you could have
Absolutely.
like you might be able to have like Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid, some other things, defense spending, not offense spending. Uh, although it's a murky water to wade into. But I think
Yeah,
sales
absolutely.
tax would sales tax is also really interesting in that it gets around anybody who is an undocumented worker. because anytime that money is spent, whether they hand off the money to somebody else, hey, go to the store, buy me a gallon of milk or something, like the money is what's being taxed, not the individual. And that gets around, it circumvents a very interesting buffer that certain individuals have found a way to benefit from, as well as
Yeah,
anybody who has a loophole. It's like if you buy shit, you pay tax on that shit.
right. Yeah, and I've written about this before too. It's just the sales tax seems to be the most fair alternative tax there is. And I think most people would agree that I would rather see an increase in sales tax, even if it was something ridiculous like 10% increase in sales tax over an increase in income tax or property tax. And I think that because you have more discretionary income, people are going to invest in things. They are going to purchase bigger homes, go on more vacations. So you'll have more money being spent in the economy to tax as well. So you'll have much more of the opposite effects. I mean, the whole reason why people design airplanes in a more aerodynamic fashion is to increase the efficiency of fuel spent on that plane flying. You don't have a plane that becomes less aerodynamic if your goal is to preserve fuel economy.
It's a great example. Great example. And then there are forces in play which are doing everything they can to fight that efficiency because let's just say they're the fuel company in this case. They like you buying a lot of fuel from them, so they don't want you to have to pay less. I think it's the
Yeah,
same tangent as um, food companies that make unhealthy food. It's really easy for the entire food industry to say, oh, well, it's just because you don't exercise enough. So you should just exercise and continue to buy my product. It's much harder for so called food companies to say, actually, you should eat less of my product or you should not consume my poison at all. And you should eat these other healthy foods. So I won't define what those are at this point in time because that's another rabbit hole. But it's much easier for me to say, do something else unrelated to my industry in addition to maintaining status quo with me, which affects my bottom line, and I see dollar signs, versus an actual change in behavior, which changes the course of how everything plays out. It's much easier to say buy someone else's things instead of mine. So it's harder for the government to say to give up that tax. Like once that water faucet is turned on, you could have 100 people who are drinking from that water faucet, and nobody wants to be the first one to to start to slowly, slowly turn it back off, even if that water would otherwise directly help way more people or be much more efficient in other. It would be better served elsewhere.
yeah, yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I believe that the way that our Constitution is set up as well, it kind of perpetuates this weird, like, politicians have created a workaround for all of these weird taxes because that's not really innately part of the system that was initially set up. So they have to like use it or lose it in many of these cases, and they've become so addicting to spending people's money that they have all of these other goals that they have to get done. Like the whole thing involving this increase of the IRS agents and reporting, the excise tax on gasoline has increased, which also affects everything in the economy, which will end up raising prices on absolutely everything because if people didn't notice, you need gasoline for not just directly the things that you use, but all of the indirect things, all of the things that you buy from stores, they had to get there somehow. Transportation is an innate part of the economy. So all of this ridiculousness of adding in more taxes and adding in more agents to assess the discrepancies is not going to make anything more efficient overall.
We're on a very interesting trajectory. And if you buy an electric vehicle, there's new taxes for them too. They're escaping the system. They're not paying their fair share. So I think in Michigan, they might have to pay like $1,000 a year just to own an electric vehicle?
I did hear something in the Inflationary Reduction Act that they did implement new credits for the purchase of electric vehicles, which is also just like incentivizing the better off portion of our society because it's not like electric cars are they're competitive at the mid range, but they're still not competitive at the low range for new vehicles. So it's also hilarious to have that sort of comment of like, oh, all these IRS agents are going to go after the rich people in society. It's like, okay, well, the same act, I think, just also subsidized rich people buying new vehicles of a certain type. So
I th-
it's it's a crapshoot.
yeah, and I don't know if that one was a coincidence, but I have my suspicions, and it always seems to work out for people in power to maintain that power. And it's similar to how a lot of people, they don't have a salary, so they look like they're glorious people by taking a $1 or a $0 salary per year, but that's just because that would be taxable. So they make their income through other means that are not taxable, like through real estate, or um, they take out loans against collateral, and debt is not taxable. And that's one of those interesting secrets that we could talk about in another episode, where debt is not taxed and people use that to their advantage. Other people are forced to live off an income.
That would be a really wonderful thing to explore, sort of the difference between living under, like becoming rich while living under a, debt economy versus living and becoming rich under like a, let's say like a fixed economy, like a gold standard or something like that. Because the way that the two play out is very different. Why would you spend money if they're printing it? Being kind of like central to that first idea, whereas gold or any other precious metal, or let's say fixed, just whatever fixed currency there is. On the other hand, you're valuing everything compared to that. So that itself will become more valuable over time, which that incentivizes savings, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that will be a really excellent thing to explore, possibly even next week, if we want to go and do that. The one thing that I want to say too on this Inflationary Reduction Act and other things done by government is that I want people to get used to the idea that what government does is for the sustaining longevity of the government itself. It's just like a corporation. The corporation does everything it can to maintain the corporation itself, and people are kind of organized within the structure in order to promote this common goal. So yes, they will get rich off of it themselves, but there's also this idea of like we want this system that's making us rich to maintain its power and authority. Government's exactly the same way. It's just a monopoly in that way.
That's very true. And sometimes there isn't a reason for being taxed other than they can. I was reading something that a few years ago it was referencing in California, because of the advent of text messaging, people were using landlines a little bit less than normal. So the population was growing, so there was still decent accommodation there. There was compensatory use of the landlines, but a lot of people were switching over to text messages, and landlines were taxed. So then they tried to literally pass a tax per text message because they were losing revenue. And then they also tried to retroactively tax text messages which were sent over the past few years, because they estimated it would bring in like something like $230 million in retroactive tax revenue. So not only is that strange, but also when you think and you try to question, well, why are they looking to tax that? And the answer is because they can. They just, oh, you're spending money. Hey, can I have some of that? It's kind of like if you're, when people want to, this, it like bothers me. They want a cigarette from you, or they want to borrow your lighter. It's like, I don't see somebody with a sandwich walking around and say, hey, I noticed you have a sandwich. Can I have a bite of that sandwich? Yeah, it's kind of just a weird world that we live in. So
I don't know. I wouldn't put it past a politician to go ahead and ask for a bite of that sandwich. I feel like it's kind of in their nature to be inherently exploitive. It's
they're gonna take the sandwich. They take the bite, and then I open my hand and they spit that little piece into my hand, and that's what I'm left with, and I'm happy. In fact, I give it back to them. I say, well, the WEF told me that I will own nothing and be happy, so I want to give this piece back to you because you know best. You know best. You're almighty, omniscient, omnipotent, and I will trust every decision, and I shall not question.
Yeah, it's
I shall.
infuriating that people can't seem to tell the difference between like they somehow can hate like the wealthy CEO of a company and that's perfectly acceptable, but then not also realize that the CEOs of our own country act in exactly the same manner, if not worse.
Very true.
Infuriating.
Just just stay home, sniff your own farts, watch the television, obey, and don't question, and they'll let you know when it's safe to come out.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, it's time for people to wake up, or we're gonna unfortunately just kind of like leave you in the dust because if you're too dull to even sort of engage at this level, then you know, just God help you. We're gonna do all
Don't
that
be a
we can
muppet.
to preserve. Like, look, we're young guys, and we're gonna have to live with whatever sort of apocryphal future they're charting a course for us on. So I want to have some say in the steering because it's my right as an American citizen to do so. So
when you see that ship headed toward the tsunami, start asking questions. Actually, at that point, you should realize it's too late to ask questions, and you
I
should have
feel
been
like
asking them beforehand.
we have a ship that's approaching a tsunami that's also filled with icebergs as meteors are raining down from the sky.
But at least there's no plastic straws in that water.
That's true. That's true. I mean, like, just thank goodness that these IRS agents have bought so many weapons and are just stockpiling ammunitions, because that's exactly the peaceful sentimentality that I want from this particular group of people that could just go and invade people's homes and demand tax money at a whim. Oh yeah, I'm sure. Like you can say, oh well, that's illegal. It's like, oh well, that hasn't stopped them before. They're going to
Yeah.
ask for forgiveness, not for permission.
Well, fiat money means by government decree, and it has proof of war and proof of violence. So strap in, everybody.
Yep, absolutely. We will see you next week on our program where we will discuss more interesting topics and you know kind of follow our journey as we come down this slimy rabbit hole.
Yeah, yeah. With our skeptical vision and our cross examination skills.
Take care, everyone.
See ya.